When I saw the email pop up in my inbox, I felt the ground shift under me, like someone had yanked the rug from my feet. Three words stared back at me, so small on the screen, yet so colossal in meaning. I'm leaving you. My hands trembled, my chest ached, and for a moment, I couldn't even breathe. How does a life you built together, every sacrifice, every quiet dream deferred, disappear in a single sentence? I never saw it coming, not even the faintest shadow. I remember sitting there at our oak kitchen table, the one he had picked out because he liked the grain pattern, staring at the steaming cup of coffee I had poured for him that morning. The aroma of roasted beans filled the room, mingling with the faint scent of his aftershave still lingering in the air. I could almost hear his laugh echoing from the living room, a laugh I thought was mine to hear for the rest of my life. And then, nothing. Just those three words and a sharp, hollow ache in my chest. It's funny how your mind starts replaying everything in reverse when life does this to you. I thought about the first day we met, the way he smiled at me in that tiny cafe downtown, the careless confidence he carried like a second skin. I thought about our wedding, how I pressed my hand to his chest as we said our vows and promised I'd be there through storms and sunshine. I thought about every night I stayed up helping him with business plans. Every weekend I gave up my own hobbies, my own dreams, so he could chase his. And now I realized I had given him the one thing he'd take for granted the most: me. Before I tell you how it came to this, let me take you back. Back to the life we shared before the storm broke, before the betrayal. Our life looked ordinary from the outside, maybe even enviable to someone who only glanced at it. A modest home in the suburbs, the smell of fresh bread in the oven on Saturday mornings, the chatter of neighborhood kids playing tag down the street. I used to wake up early, the soft hum of the refrigerator my only companion in the kitchen, and make coffee, just the way he liked it. Cream, 2 sugars. Then I'd peek into the living room, watching him scroll through emails, suit neatly pressed, even on a Saturday. He had this way of concentrating, furrowing his brow, that made me feel like he was always chasing something just out of reach, and I wanted so badly to catch it for him. I used to have a career, a small but promising one. Graphic design was my passion. I loved the smell of ink, the feel of paper under my fingers, the way colors could tell stories no words ever could. But when he told me that he had a dream, a real shot at building his own company, I gave up my dream without a second thought. I told myself it was temporary, a pause. I'll pick it back up when he's established, I said, and I meant it. I believed in us, believed in him. We ate our meals together when we could, usually late at night after he got home, and I watched him flourish in ways that made my chest swell with pride. The first time his business started turning a profit, he hugged me so tight I could feel his heartbeat against mine and whispered, "We did it." And for a while, it felt like we really had, like I had made a choice worth every silent sacrifice, every sleepless night, every missed opportunity. Our weekends weren't glamorous. Most of them were spent poring over spreadsheets, signing contracts, and talking about growth strategies. I kept the house in order, made sure the laundry was folded, meals ready, our little garden tended. It wasn't flashy, but it was love in action. Or so I thought. Every small victory of his, every milestone he reached, felt like a triumph for us both. And maybe that was my mistake, thinking it was enough to share in his dreams while mine lay dormant, quietly waiting for their turn. Friends would ask me why I gave up my career so easily. "Don't you want your own life?" they'd say. And I'd smile politely. Because what could I tell them? That love, or at least what I thought was love, felt like a living contract, my life in service of his ambitions. That it wasn't about resentment, it was about hope, patience, loyalty. I remember the night we celebrated his first big client win. The champagne cork had popped with a satisfying pop, and we laughed in the tiny balcony of our apartment, lights twinkling below like stars stolen from the sky. I watched him animatedly explain the deal to his business partner over the phone, gesturing so passionately I could almost hear his fire behind his words. I squeezed his shoulder, and he looked at me with those eyes that always made me feel seen. "You did this, you know?" he said, voice low and sincere. "I couldn't have done it without you." And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But that's the thing about dreams. They grow. They evolve. And sometimes when you reach them, the person who helped you climb gets left behind on the ground, holding nothing but memories and empty promises. It started slowly. Small changes in his behavior, the extra late nights that weren't about business calls, the way his phone would buzz discreetly on the nightstand, and he'd walk away to answer it, closing the bedroom door softly but just enough to make me notice. At first, I shrugged it off. "He's stressed," I told myself. "He's working hard, that's all." I wanted to trust him. I wanted to be the wife who believed until the end. There were also the subtle shifts in our interactions. A glance that lingered too long at someone else on the street. A laugh I didn't recognize. A new scent in the collar of his shirt that wasn't his cologne. My stomach twisted, but I pushed it down. I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself I was imagining it. And yet deep down I felt it. The first tendrils of doubt weaving into my bones, whispering questions I wasn't ready to ask. Was it me? Was I not enough? Had my sacrifices been invisible? But I still held on. I had to, because this was love, wasn't it? Love meant patience. Love meant believing, even when doubt crept like a shadow at the edge of the light.
I'll never forget the first clue that made me stop ignoring the unease curling in my chest. It wasn't a dramatic scene, no shouting, no confrontation. It was in the small, almost imperceptible ways he started to drift. One Friday evening, I had prepared his favorite dinner, roasted chicken, mashed sweet potatoes, and green beans sautéed with garlic, the aroma filling the apartment with a sense of home. I set the table, lit the candle, and poured 2 glasses of wine. When he came in, he smiled, but something was off. He hugged me quickly, kissed my cheek, and muttered a distracted, "That smells great, babe," before disappearing into the bedroom with his phone. I tried to shake it off, telling myself he must be on an important call. But then I noticed the subtle shift in his phone habits. He started locking it more often, keeping it on silent, taking calls in the bathroom or behind closed doors. And there was the faint smell of a perfume he had never worn before. I caught a glimpse of it once when he leaned over the kitchen counter, a sweet floral scent that didn't belong. I didn't want to believe what my mind started to suggest. Not him, not the man I had given everything to, but the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it was growing faster than I could pretend. I tried subtlety first. I'd ask him casually about his day, who he'd met, what his meetings were about. "Just business," he'd answer, and I'd nod, smiling, but inside I was gnawing at the edges of doubt. I became more aware of his patterns, memorizing the hours he left the apartment, the times he returned. Each little lie or omission was a tiny cut. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or clever avoidance, but the distance between us was growing, and I could feel it. Then came the first undeniable moment. He came home later than usual one night, breathless, like he had been running. I asked where he'd been, and he said, "Just a late client dinner, nothing important." But there was something in his tone, a stiffness I hadn't heard before that made my heart sink. I wanted to confront him, to demand the truth, but fear held me back. Fear of shattering the life I had devoted myself to, fear of the unknown. I started noticing other things, small things that seemed insignificant at first, but together painted a picture I didn't want to see. A lipstick stain on his collar, a name that popped up too often in his text messages, a sudden interest in new clothes, new hobbies, things that clearly weren't part of his old self. He was changing, or maybe revealing a side of himself I had never known. And still, I hoped. I clung to the idea that maybe it was nothing, that I was imagining it. After all, I had been the one sacrificing, putting my life on hold for his dreams, cooking his favorite meals, making the home warm and inviting, cheering him on at every milestone. He owed me, not in a transactional way, but in the silent acknowledgement of love and loyalty. Didn't he? The tension gnawed at me for weeks. I became hyper-aware of every detail, the slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, the hurried text messages, the unexplained trips, the faint perfume that made my stomach twist in knots. My own reflection in the mirror started to feel foreign. The tired eyes, the hair I hadn't styled because I was always busy tending to him, the lingering scent of the meals I prepared while his life outside our home seemed to bloom. One evening, I finally voiced it. Cautiously. "Is there someone else?" My voice trembled, barely above a whisper. I tried to keep it casual, as if it was just a silly thought passing through my mind. He froze, and for a heartbeat, the man I had loved, the one I thought I knew, looked like a stranger. Then he laughed, a nervous, hollow laugh. "What are you talking about? No, of course not. You're imagining things." But the lie was palpable. I felt it in the air, like a cold draft under a door. My chest tightened and tears burned the backs of my eyes. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but I forced myself to stay calm. Because that's what I had always been. The patient one, the loyal one, the silent supporter. From that moment, I knew the truth was somewhere close, lurking just out of reach. The uncertainty was almost worse than knowing. Every day became a careful dance of observation, noting his patterns, listening to the inflections in his voice, catching glimpses of a life I wasn't a part of. Then came the day I found it. I was looking for a document on his laptop, a contract we needed for the business, when I noticed a folder labeled with her name. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. With trembling hands, I clicked it open. And there she was. Photographs, messages, receipts, dinner reservations, proof that the man I had devoted myself to for years had been building a parallel life, one that didn't include me. The images cut deeper than any words could. Him laughing with her at a restaurant, arms wrapped around her waist, lips brushing her hair. The intimacy was undeniable, raw, and horrifying. I closed the laptop slowly, my vision blurred with tears, my stomach turned, my hands shook, and I felt the first real pangs of anger. Sharp, fiery, consuming. I sat there at the edge of our bed, the laptop closed in front of me, the air thick with the smell of the dinner I had cooked for him that night. I realized in that moment that I had been living in a bubble of hope, a fragile illusion of loyalty and love, while he had been quietly dismantling it. And I had given him everything, my career, my energy, my heart. The betrayal wasn't just about him leaving or about the affair. It was the audacity of it. The fact that after all I sacrificed, after all the years I had held space for his dreams, he could walk away so easily, so unapologetically for someone else, someone younger, someone shiny, someone who fit the image of the new world he wanted to inhabit. And in that moment, I swore, not out of revenge, not out of spite, but out of a deep, resolute clarity that my story was not over. I had paused my life for him, yes, but that didn't mean I had lost. I would rebuild. I would reclaim what was mine. But first, I had to decide what I was going to do next. The days after I found out felt like wading through a fog. Everything around me, our home, the furniture we picked together, even the smell of his shirts that still lingered in the closet became heavy with memory, with deceit. I couldn't just pretend it wasn't there. Every glance at his empty office chair, every casual mention of his late nights at work made my stomach twist like a storm was churning inside me. I started keeping notes, little observations, the way detectives do in movies I'd secretly loved. The extra locks on his devices, the new perfume that clung faintly to his collars, the sudden insistence on business trips. I wasn't snooping for drama, at least I tried to tell myself that. I was collecting proof, building a picture of the truth I was too afraid to confront directly. And yet fear rooted me. Fear of confrontation, fear of the explosion it would cause. I had been the patient one, the loyal wife, the quiet supporter. But patience had limits, and loyalty without reciprocity leaves an emptiness that swallows you whole. I started dreaming in fragments, fragments of him with her, fragments of our life undone, waking with my heart pounding, the faint smell of coffee from the morning ritual now sharp and bitter. I thought about leaving, about packing a bag and disappearing while he was at a meeting. But even that seemed impossible. This wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a betrayal of years, of trust, of the life I had painstakingly built alongside him. And somehow I still felt tied, like a mariner to a mast in a stormy sea, unsure if I should cut the ropes or let them snap on their own. It all came to a head one Tuesday. I had returned from picking up groceries, the bags heavy with the smell of fresh basil and ripe tomatoes. I stepped into the living room to find him sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling, laughing softly, the laugh that once belonged only to me. And then I saw her name flash on the screen. Something inside me snapped. I didn't yell, didn't cry, not at first. I simply walked over, put my hands on his shoulders, and looked him in the eye. "Who is she?" I asked, voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. He froze, fumbling for words, looking like a man caught in a sudden storm. It's nothing, he muttered, but the words were weak, unconvincing. "Nothing?" I repeated, voice steadier than I felt. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking your phone, sneaking around, and now you tell me it's nothing?" He swallowed hard, eyes darting away. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." The simplicity of his confession hit me harder than any dramatic argument could. No apologies, no remorse, just a casual acknowledgement that he had moved on while I had paused my life for him. My heart ached, not just from betrayal, but from the realization that I had allowed myself to become invisible in my own marriage. I didn't cry then. I didn't scream. Not at first. I simply walked over, grabbed my keys, and walked out into the chill evening air. The city smelled of wet pavement and exhaust, but it felt cleaner than the suffocating smell of our apartment, where deceit had settled into the corners like dust. I drove aimlessly, letting the steering wheel vibrate under my palms, my mind racing. That night I sat in the small cafe where we had first met. The smell of coffee and baked goods wrapped around me like a familiar hug, comforting and sad all at once. I thought about all the years I had sacrificed, the projects I had put on hold, the evenings spent proofreading his business plans instead of writing my own proposals, the weekends spent cleaning and cooking while my own dreams gathered dust in drawers. I thought about the quiet dignity I had maintained, the way I had always believed love required patience. And yet, I realized something important. My life had not ended. I had only paused it. It was a hard, bitter truth to swallow, but once I did, a sense of clarity emerged. I couldn't change what had happened, couldn't rewind the years I had devoted to him, but I could decide what came next. I could reclaim my identity, my dreams, and my self-respect.
The first step was simple, practical. I changed the locks, closed off accounts he had access to, and set boundaries. Each action was a small reclaiming of space, both physical and emotional. I also confided in a few close friends, the ones who had always been my anchor, and their support reminded me that I wasn't alone. Their voices were gentle, patient, encouraging. "You deserve better," they said, and I started to believe them. But believing and acting are two different things. The emotional labor of moving on was immense. I cried in the shower, letting the hot water wash away both the tears and the shame I carried. I walked alone through parks, feeling the chill of the wind on my face, thinking about all the things I wanted to do for myself. Classes I had postponed, trips I had canceled, artwork I had shelved. Each step felt like a tiny act of rebellion against the life that had tried to consume me. And then finally, I allowed myself to plan. Not revenge, not confrontation, just planning. Planning a life that was mine again. A life where my voice mattered. A life where my dreams weren't paused for anyone. I enrolled in a design workshop I had been putting off for years, started freelancing again, and slowly the colors returned to my world. The smell of ink and paint, the hum of my computer, the thrill of creating, it reminded me of who I was, the woman who existed before the marriage, before the sacrifices, before the betrayal. It didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. There were nights of doubt, mornings of panic, moments when I missed him, despite everything. But each small accomplishment, each tiny step forward was a testament to my resilience. And I realized that he leaving me didn't signify my failure. It signified a pause, a detour, and a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life, that love should lift you, not erase you. That loyalty is precious, but self-respect is essential. And that sometimes the most profound growth comes from the deepest pain.
I couldn't keep living in the shadow of his betrayal. Every glance at the empty chair where he used to sit, every faint whiff of cologne lingering on the couch reminded me of what I had lost. And yet, I knew that wallowing in that loss wouldn't bring me back to myself. I needed action. I started small. The first morning, I walked into our apartment and opened the closet doors. The coats, the suits, the shoes, all of it bore the weight of his absence now. I began sorting through them, packing away things I didn't need, selling some, donating others. It was symbolic, yes, but also necessary. With each box I filled, I felt a little lighter, like I was reclaiming the physical space he had once occupied with deceit. Then came the legal steps, dividing accounts, securing joint finances, speaking to lawyers I had previously avoided because I didn't want to think about a life without him. It was bitter, humiliating at times, to confront the reality that the man I had trusted completely had been living a lie behind my back. But with every form signed, every password changed, I felt my power return. I wasn't just surviving, I was asserting control over my own life again. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had once poured his coffee with love and devotion, now spread with papers, bills, and contracts. The smell of roasted garlic and simmering tomato sauce filled the apartment, but it didn't taste like home anymore. It tasted like possibility. I realized that in the silence of my solitude, I could hear my own thoughts clearly, my ambitions, my desires, my long-suppressed creativity. I could hear the woman I had been before marriage, before compromise, before betrayal. And then, the moment that shook me the most, the confrontation. I didn't plan it, it just happened. He came back into the apartment unexpectedly, thinking I would be waiting, perhaps hoping I would still be the woman who forgave easily. But I wasn't. I was calm, composed, and finally free of the fear and confusion that had kept me tethered to him for so long. He looked at me, surprise flickering across his face, then that familiar smirk, the one that had once made my heart flutter.
I wanted to talk, he began, uncertain. I shook my head. There's nothing left to talk about, I said softly but firmly. I've accepted the truth, and I'm moving forward. You had your chance to be honest, to fight for us, and you chose her instead. His face fell, but I didn't relent. You think leaving me was about her, but really it was about you. Your selfishness, your inability to appreciate what we had. You can't change the past, but I can change my future. For the first time in years, I felt the full weight of liberation. I wasn't angry in the chaotic, destructive way I had imagined I might be. I was clear, decisive, and dignified. Every word I spoke was measured, infused with the strength I had reclaimed through solitude and reflection. After he left, the silence of the apartment was profound, but it was no longer heavy with despair. It was quiet with possibility. I poured myself a glass of wine, not out of ritual or habit, but as a small celebration of survival. I sank into the couch, feeling the worn leather against my back, and let myself breathe fully, deeply, for the first time in months. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. I took on design projects I had once dreamed of, reconnected with old colleagues. And slowly, the world began to see me again. Not as someone's wife, not as a supporting character, but as a woman in her own right. Each completed project was a reminder that my talents, my dreams, and my heart were still very much alive. And then came the small, quiet victories. A gallery agreed to display my work. A client praised my creativity in a way that made me blush. I began taking morning walks through the park again, breathing in the smell of wet leaves and fresh grass, the laughter of children ringing like music. Life felt vibrant, textured, and mine. There were moments of doubt, of course. Nights when I questioned whether I was strong enough to move on completely. Times when I glanced at my phone, half expecting a message from him, and then realized I no longer needed it. Those moments passed more quickly each time, like ripples fading in a pond. Through all of it, I learned a lesson I wish I had understood earlier. True growth doesn't come from clinging to what was, but from embracing what can be. I didn't need his validation, his love, or his approval. I only needed to remember who I was and who I wanted to become. And slowly, the resentment softened into understanding. Not forgiveness for him, not yet, perhaps not ever, but a deep recognition that my life, my choices, and my happiness were my own responsibility. I had given my heart freely, yes, but I had also reclaimed it piece by piece. By the time the seasons changed, I was unrecognizable to the woman I had been at the start of this journey. Not because I had forgotten the past, but because I had integrated it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every pang of heartbreak had built the foundation for the woman I was becoming. Stronger, wiser, more compassionate, but also more discerning. And in that clarity, I realized I hadn't lost. I had only paused. My life was waiting for me, vibrant, promising, and entirely mine. It was the first time in months that I allowed myself to think about the public consequences of his actions. Not for revenge, not to humiliate him, that wasn't my style, but to acknowledge that what he did had ripple effects, and they deserved recognition, not secrecy. I started cautiously, speaking to friends and colleagues who had known us as a couple. I didn't gossip. I told my story honestly, matter-of-factly. I supported him. I believed in him. And he chose someone else. That simple statement was enough. Some were shocked. Some expressed sympathy. Others simply nodded, understanding without judgment. I realized that by telling the truth, I reclaimed control over the narrative. Word spread quietly, not in a cruel way, but in the gentle acknowledgement of reality. Business associates who had once praised him without seeing the sacrifices behind his success began to understand the full picture. It wasn't about shaming him. It was about acknowledging that success achieved on the backs of others without gratitude has its own emptiness. Then came the confrontation. I hadn't sought, but that circumstances forced upon me. At a networking event, I ran into him and the woman he had left me for. I didn't plan it, didn't want it, but life has a way of creating these moments when you least expect them. He looked surprised, perhaps even a little guilty. She looked confident, radiant, unaware of the years he had spent with me, unaware of the sacrifices that had made his current life possible. I didn't say much. I simply smiled politely, extending my hand. "Hello," I said, and that was all. The power wasn't in confrontation or anger. It was in composure, in showing that I was unshaken, unbroken, and fully present in my own life. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in our social circles. People who had admired him, respected him, or even had envied him began to look at him differently once they understood the story. Not with cruelty, not with vindictiveness, but with the quiet recognition that actions have consequences and integrity matters. Meanwhile, my own life began to bloom in ways I hadn't anticipated. Clients sought me out because of my talent. Colleagues invited me into new projects. And even old friends I hadn't spoken to in years came back into my life, drawn by the strength and clarity I was radiating. The world seemed to open up before me, as though it had been waiting for me to step forward, claim my space, and speak my truth. I also began writing again. Journal entries at first, private thoughts and reflections, and then stories, short pieces, design ideas that spilled onto the page with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. Each word, each stroke of the pen, was a reclamation of the time I had surrendered, a testament to my resilience and vision. One afternoon, as I walked through a small art fair displaying my latest pieces, I overheard a woman whispering to her friend, "I heard what he did. Can you imagine? And she's thriving now. Look at her." I smiled quietly to myself, not out of pride, not out of spite, but from the deep satisfaction of knowing that my life was mine again, that I hadn't needed revenge to prove my worth. I had only needed patience, courage, and belief in myself. The public consequences were subtle, but meaningful. He had lost the veneer of perfection, the unquestioned admiration he once commanded, and I had gained authenticity, dignity, and freedom. I didn't need to shout it from the rooftops. I simply lived it, day by day, project by project, step by step. There was a particular moment that crystallized it for me. I received a message from a colleague I had known for years, someone who had watched my quiet dedication behind the scenes. She wrote, "You didn't lose. You paused, and now you're unstoppable. I'm proud of you." I reread it several times, tears pricking my eyes. The message wasn't about him, wasn't about proving anything to the world. It was about recognition, the acknowledgement that I had endured, that I had not allowed betrayal to define me, and that I had emerged stronger on the other side. And slowly, I began to realize that the public consequences weren't only for him, they were for me too. Every step I took, every choice I made, every project I completed was a living testament to the truth that life continues and thrives after heartbreak, that we are not defined by those who leave us, nor by the dreams we paused, but by the courage we summoned to reclaim them. The journey wasn't smooth, of course. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, days when old feelings surged unexpectedly. But each challenge was an opportunity to reinforce my boundaries, to reaffirm my priorities, to remember that my value was intrinsic, not contingent on someone else's affection or approval. One evening, I sat at my favorite cafe again, the same place where I had first begun to rebuild, and I realized something profound. I had entered a new chapter of life without bitterness, without vengeance, but with clarity and grace. The woman I had once been, uncertain, self-sacrificing, almost invisible, was gone. In her place was someone resilient, self-aware, and deeply alive. And in that realization, I found peace. Not complete closure, life rarely gives that, but a powerful sense of direction. I was no longer waiting for someone else to define me, no longer sacrificing my dreams for theirs, no longer tethered to the shadow of betrayal. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my joy.
By the time I reached the public consequence stage of my journey, the world around me had begun to shift in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't about scandal or vindictiveness. It was about quiet recognition. My husband's actions, once hidden, were now visible to those who mattered. Friends, family, colleagues. Not because I broadcast them, but because the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply buried. The first time I felt the shift, it was subtle. A mutual acquaintance mentioned, almost casually, "I heard what happened. I can't believe he did that after everything you gave him." I nodded, calm, letting them speak. I didn't need to argue or defend myself. The acknowledgement was enough. The relief came not from their validation, but from the realization that integrity, when absent, has consequences: social, emotional, and professional. In the office, too, the ripple effects were tangible. Colleagues who had previously been hesitant to praise my work now did so openly. Some who had once idolized him now approached me with quiet admiration, asking for advice or expressing surprise at my resilience. It wasn't about shaming him. It was about the natural justice that comes when actions no longer match the image someone has cultivated. And yet I remained dignified. I never gossiped. I didn't call him out publicly. I let the truth speak for itself through the way I carried myself, through the success and joy I was reclaiming in my own life. That, I realized, was more powerful than any dramatic confrontation. The moral of it was simple. Actions have consequences, and living authentically is the ultimate testimony to one's character. There was one encounter that tested this balance. At a business conference, I found myself seated across from him at the same table. He smiled a little too casually and asked how I had been. I took a slow breath, feeling the tension in my chest, and responded honestly, but without venom. "I've been well, focused. It's been a time of growth." He looked momentarily startled, perhaps expecting anger or pleading, but I offered neither. Instead, I shared my accomplishments, projects I had completed, the new opportunities that had arisen. He listened, and I noticed the flicker of recognition in his eyes. Not admiration, perhaps, but awareness. The man who had once walked away thinking he could continue without consequence now saw that life had moved on without him, and that, I realized, was the quiet justice I had been seeking all along. Outside the professional world, the consequences reached closer to home. Mutual friends and family members began to approach me with understanding, asking gently how I was coping, offering support without pity. It was validating in a way that felt subtle but profound. I wasn't the woman defined by a cheating spouse anymore. I was the woman who had endured, reflected, and reclaimed her life. At times I reflected on how strange it was. The person who had caused the most pain in my life had, in a sense, catalyzed my rebirth. Without his betrayal, I might not have recognized the depth of my own strength, my capacity for resilience, and the beauty of starting over. It didn't excuse what he did, but it reframed it. Pain had led to awakening. Betrayal had led to clarity. I also noticed the contrast in social perception. People who envied him for his apparent success began to see the hollow nature of that life. The fame, the money, the charm that concealed selfishness and deceit. And while I didn't revel in it, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that truth eventually catches up with everyone. Integrity matters more than appearances. One afternoon, I met with a close friend who had watched everything unfold. She said gently, "You didn't just survive this, you've transformed it. And the best part, he can't take any of it from you. Not your skills, not your strength, not your peace." Her words struck me, and I felt the final pieces of the public consequence settle into place. The world knew the truth, not in whispers of gossip, but in the undeniable proof of my life moving forward. Even in social gatherings, I began to notice subtle acknowledgments. Friends would make space for me to share, colleagues would reference my accomplishments with respect. It wasn't vindictive or performative, it was real. My story, the pain, the sacrifice, the betrayal, had created ripples, and those ripples had brought a quiet accountability to him and recognition to me. The consequences also taught me a lesson about empathy. I realized that people often operate from their own weaknesses and insecurities, and that my former husband's actions were more a reflection of his character than a measure of my worth. I felt compassion, not excuses, but compassion that allowed me to release lingering anger. And in that release, I found a serenity that had eluded me in the early days of heartbreak. Looking back, I understood that the public consequences were not about punishment. They were about restoration, restoring truth, restoring dignity, restoring the balance between my life and the reality of his choices. And most importantly, they were about teaching myself that my voice, my choices, and my presence mattered, regardless of what he had done or how the world had judged him. By the end of that season, I felt fully present in my life again. The apartment smelled like fresh herbs from my small kitchen garden, my studio was cluttered with creative projects, and my calendar was filled with meetings, exhibitions, and personal commitments I had been putting off for years. I was thriving in every sense, and the public consequences, subtle, dignified, unavoidable, had reinforced the truth. I was not a victim. I was a survivor, a creator, a woman who had reclaimed her narrative. And in that reclamation, I discovered the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the consequences we fear most, being left behind, exposed, or doubted, can become the catalyst for the life we were always meant to lead. The world may notice, or it may not, but the one who matters most is you, your choices, your dignity, your growth. Healing was never linear. I thought that once the public consequences had settled, I would feel complete, but grief and betrayal leave shadows that linger, even when life is moving forward. There were mornings when I woke with a hollow ache, the memory of his laughter or her smile brushing against my consciousness like a cruel whisper. But gradually, I began to see those shadows not as threats, but as reminders of how far I had come. The first real sign of healing came through small, everyday moments. I remember sitting by my studio window one morning, the sun spilling across my desk as I sketched a new design. The pen in my hand felt like an extension of my very self. The smell of fresh ink and coffee intertwined, comforting and familiar. And for the first time in months, I didn't think about him, didn't replay the betrayal or the loneliness. I thought only about the shape of my ideas, the potential in my own hands. That clarity, that peace was a milestone. I began to invest in myself fully. Weekends were no longer spent cleaning or tending to a home that no longer mirrored my dreams. They were filled with workshops, gallery visits, long walks where the crisp air reminded me that life was still rich with possibility. I took yoga classes, reconnected with old friends over coffee, and even started mentoring younger designers who reminded me of myself, eager and ambitious, but still learning the weight of sacrifice. One evening, while organizing my office, I found a box I had tucked away years ago, full of old designs, unfinished projects, and letters I had written but never sent. I opened each envelope slowly, letting the nostalgia wash over me. Some designs were crude, some letters raw with emotion, but all of it was mine. I realized that every ounce of creativity I had thought I lost had only been dormant, and now I could breathe life into it again. I also allowed myself to reflect on the emotional lessons. Anger and betrayal no longer ruled my inner world. They were acknowledged, processed, and set aside. I forgave him quietly, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace.
I forgave myself too for believing in him, for sacrificing my dreams, for staying longer than I should have. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift for someone else. It was a gift I gave myself to reclaim joy, clarity, and freedom. Through the months, I started to rebuild relationships that had been strained by my focus on supporting his ambitions. I spent more time with family, listening deeply, laughing freely, savoring moments I had once let slip past unnoticed. I reconnected with my parents, who had quietly supported me throughout, and with friends who reminded me of the importance of presence, of living fully in the now. Professionally, my work began to flourish. Each project I completed carried the weight of my resilience and the pride of authenticity. Clients praised not only my talent, but also my vision and integrity. Slowly, opportunities I had once only dreamed of began to materialize. I had paused my life for years, but now I realized I could live twice as fully, with experience, wisdom, and depth that no one could take from me. And love, I discovered, had many forms, not romantic, not dependent, but love for oneself. I learned to nurture my own heart, honor my own ambitions, and protect my peace fiercely. It was a subtle shift, imperceptible to outsiders, but transformative. I no longer sought approval or validation from those who had once hurt me. My joy, my pride, my sense of worth were now rooted in me alone. There were moments, of course, when I would encounter reminders, a social media post, a shared acquaintance, a name mentioned in passing. But instead of pain, I now felt a sense of closure. Those reminders were simply echoes of the past, distant enough that they could not disturb the calm I had cultivated. I had built a life anchored in my own values, my own creativity, and my own choices. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling like scattered stars below, I realized the depth of my transformation. The woman I had been, the one who gave everything and expected nothing in return, had grown into someone fully alive, fully self-aware, and fully in control of her destiny. The heartbreak had been the crucible, but from it I had emerged resilient, radiant, and ready to embrace the future. I even found joy in the small things again. The smell of rain on pavement, the laughter of children in the park, the quiet hum of music as I worked on a new project, all of it felt vivid, alive, and mine. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I was living in the present and planning for the future. And in this space, I realized that my journey had a broader meaning. I had not only reclaimed my life, but also my story. My voice mattered again. My dreams mattered. My worth was no longer tied to someone else's choices or actions. I had paused, yes, but I had not lost. I had simply been gathering strength, patience, and clarity for the life I was always meant to live. Healing, I understood, was not a moment, but a process. It was messy, uneven, sometimes painful, sometimes exhilarating. But each step, each breath, each choice to live authentically brought me closer to the person I had always been at my core. The woman who had been betrayed, silenced, and paused was still me, stronger, wiser, and ready to thrive. And so I continued to move forward, one day at a time, embracing the fullness of life, the richness of creativity, and the profound power of self-love. Because I had learned the ultimate truth, that while others may abandon us, betray us, or fail to see our worth, our own strength, integrity, and vision are ours to nurture, protect, and celebrate.
As I sit here now, looking out at the quiet street below, I feel a calm I never thought possible during those early months of heartbreak. The apartment smells faintly of vanilla and fresh linen, small comforts that feel like home, like my home. I've learned to cherish the ordinary moments because they are proof of life moving forward, proof of survival, proof of reclaiming what was once lost. I often think about the woman I used to be, the one who paused her dreams, who sacrificed her ambitions for someone else's vision. I don't resent her anymore. She was brave in ways that mattered, and she laid the foundation for the woman I've become. And the man who walked away? His choices are his own,
I've learned that my happiness doesn't depend on someone else recognizing my value. It lives in me. Life is full of unexpected turns. Betrayal, loss, and heartbreak can feel like the end, but they can also be the beginning of self-discovery, growth, and liberation. I paused my life, yes, but I did not lose. I rebuilt, I reclaimed, and I found a peace and strength that no one could take from me. So I ask you, dear listener, if you found yourself in my shoes, could you pause without losing yourself? Could you rebuild and reclaim the life that is yours? If my story resonates with you, if it gives even a glimmer of hope or strength, consider subscribing to hear more real-life journeys, stories of heartbreak, growth, and the quiet power of human resilience. Because sometimes the most extraordinary stories are the ones we live quietly, one brave choice at a time.